أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ثم أوحينا إليك أن اتبع ملة إبراهيم حنيفا وما كان من المشركين. إنما جعل السبت على الذين اختلفوا فيه وإن ربك ليحكم بينهم يوم القيامة فيما كانوا فيه يختلفون. ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين. وإن عاقبتم فعاقبوا بمثل ما عوقبتم به ولئن صبرتم لهو خير للصابرين. واصبر وما صبرك إلا بالله ولا تحزن عليهم ولا تك في ضيق مما يمكرون. إن الله مع الذين اتقوا والذين هم محسنون. صدق الله العظيم.
Then we reveal to you, O Muhammad, to follow the religion of Abraham, inclining toward truth, and he was not of those who associated with Allah. The Sabbath was only appointed for those who deferred over it, and indeed your Lord will judge between them on the day of resurrection concerning that over which they used to defer. Invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good instruction, and argue with them in a way that is best. Indeed, your Lord is most knowing of who has strayed from his way, and he is most knowing of who is way beside. And if you punish an enemy, O believers, punish with an equivalent of that of which you were harmed. But if you are patient, it is better for those who are patient. And be patient, O Muhammad, and your patience is not but through Allah. And do not grieve over them, and do not be in distress over what they conspire. Indeed, Allah is with those who fear Him, and those who are doers of good. Sallallahu Alaihi
Just going to hold this. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Greetings of peace and blessings. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to our event, Islam in America. First of all, I want to thank everybody for their participation during Islamic Awareness Week. Honestly, I'm blown away by the success that we've had. On Monday, we had tons of people come out and see the beauty of the Arabic language. They got to see, a little bit of what we see all the time. We open the Quran every day, but not everyone gets to see how beautiful Arabic is. On Tuesday, we had people try on hijabs and kafayas. We got to humanize an experience that, is so often dehumanized through, media stereotypes and these kind of things. Honestly, people had, a ton of great experiences through this. And I asked them, now what do you think when you see people who wear hijab, right? And they said, honestly, I don't think anything. And I think, part of the American culture, that live and let live. And that to me struck me really, really significantly, because I feel like Muslims, we have, an issue about self-consciousness. That, when we practice our religion, when we practice our sunnahs of our appearance, we experience self-consciousness. That we look a little bit different than other people, or maybe we look a lot of bit different than other people. And the truth is, for the most part, we'll find acceptance around us, as long as we bring a voice of unity. And back to Islamic Awareness Week. On Wednesday, we gave out about close to 150 bowls of ice cream, and with each bowl of ice cream, we asked people one question about Islam. So hopefully, we taught about 150 people something about Islam through that. And tonight is kind of internal discussion, but this event is obviously open to everyone. For Muslims and everybody really to get thinking about what our role is going to be living as Muslims in America. And we're gathered tonight for this really valuable discussion, because Islam in America just has so many perspectives. You can discuss the social issues that arise, matters of spirituality, the history of Muslims in this country, and even the political dynamics and political mobilization. So, as Muslims, we do have a lot of challenges to address. So I find these events really, really important and necessary as far as our growth goes. We see within the Muslim community and without the Muslim community, there are two very different kind of discourses going on. There's two very different discussions. Muslims have gotten to a point within our own community that's pretty sophisticated. We kind of, discredited, all these issues about terrorism. This is not a thing to us, right? But on the outside, people haven't really caught on. People haven't followed up with us. So, that's one important challenge that we have to answer. How do we get other people to see what we're seeing? To us, these are obvious truths, but to everyone else, they don't have the same perspective. The next is something that I already touched upon, Islamophobia and the Muslim conscience. Are these the issues that we perceive them to be? And really, I don't think, Islamophobia is really properly understood. The last thing that I want to touch on is breaking out of our shell. Right now we do have a shell that's like a shell of uniformity and of quietness. We're used to just going about our daily lives, but really, we're not going to advance until we start speaking out about issues. So, I hope these ideas got great juices flowing. I'm going to introduce our first speaker. He's going to be discussing the history of Islam in America and a lot of other things. He is Qudsi, the former vice president of our MSA here. He continues to do a halaqah here every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Every other Thursday, so mess up. He's a student at the Seminary at UMBC, at ISB, and he's a key volunteer of many of the efforts at ISB. So please welcome Qudsi.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair to Ahmed, and I want to give a quick shout out, inshallah, to the entire board for all their work in Islamic Awareness Week. Having been a part of the MSA, I know all the work that it takes to do such an event and all the sacrifices that have to be made in order to really present Islam in the manner that it deserves to be presented. So just a big shout out to the MSA and to the board, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all their efforts. بسم الله الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So at first, when Ahmed asked me to speak at this event, I wasn't entirely sure what the topic would be. Islam in America is not a particularly specific term. To say Islam in America, you are speaking about something that is wide-ranging. Anytime somebody says that I'm an American Muslim, it has so many different connotations behind it that you can't ever look at it and just say, well, that's exactly what it means when I hear this term. Particularly when you look at being an American Muslim, the term of Islam in America is a dichotomous term in and of itself. See, and as a whole, we understand that we are all Muslims, we are all trying to make it here in America, we are trying to live our lives. But at the same time, every person's distinct individual journey has led them to a different way, has led them to a different path, and brought them a certain understanding of their deen. And you can't discount that just because you haven't experienced it. So to begin, really, I just want to ask, who here is the child of a first-generation immigrant, which means that they came here, their parents came here, and they were born here? Just raise your hand. Probably a good chunk of the crowd, right? Most people who came here, their parents came here, right? Ammi Abu came 20, 30 years ago, and Khala and Chachi followed 10 years later, and go on from there. But nowadays, because of the fact that they came at the time they did, because of the fact that we were born, myself personally, I guess a little background on myself, I was born here in 1991. My parents came in, my father came in 77, my mother and him got married in 81, and they came together and they lived here. So really, for me, I have two older sisters as well, and my experience has been shaped by what I've seen through my own family, what I've seen through my schooling in Howard County, growing up where I did, and what I've seen through all my other experiences, whether it be in the masajids, or whether it be with my MSA experience. All these things have factored into how I see the world, and it factors into how any other person might see the world in their own circumstance. So, for myself, when I heard about this topic and Ahmed asked me to speak about it, I wanted to kind of do justice. To do justice to such a topic, you have to really establish a platform. You have to establish a background in order to build off of what you're going to go into next. And so with that in mind, I wanted to move into a discussion, really just a quick presentation on what Islam is and when its origins were in America. Now, in what year, I'll take a couple guesses. What year does anyone think that Muslims first came to America? Can I just get a couple guesses? Not everybody at once, please. Any guesses? Just throw out a number, please, by all means. 1800s. Anything else? 1763. So the truth is, the first Muslims came to America in 1178. As documented by a Chinese document called the Sung document, we see that these travelers came to the New World, which was called Mulan Pi. And I'm probably butchering that, so don't hold that against me. But these explorers came in 1178. And it's documented, as we can see, through a very specific document called the Sung document. So really, the first Muslims came to America in the year 1178. And that definitely predates Ammi and Abu and Chachi and all them. So, going on then, we see more Muslims coming in about 200 years later, 150 years or so. We see that the Malian Empire, which was an Islamic empire, sent in some more explorers. It was a series of sea voyages. And that began in 1310, and it continued on. In 1312, there was more expeditions that occurred, and they went on basically for a little bit, and they would go through Mexico and go through the Mississippi River as their inland. But what's interesting to note here, and I'd like to point this out particularly because there's a very strong perspective that's given. We see a lot of these explorers who came from Europe. We might talk about Cortez or any of the others, and when they came and they met any natives, what their reaction was almost always violent. It almost always was violent, and it led to several thousands of natives being killed. But what we see with these explorers is that they just came, they explored, and that was it. That was all their intentions were, was to explore. So it's interesting then that for a group that's known as savages, for a group that's known as people who can't think or reason, that they had such a high intellect that they had no need to kill anybody. Then, of course, we have the institution of slavery in America. Slavery, the first slaves truly started arriving in the year 1530. And when slaves started to arrive, throughout the course from 1530 on to about 1808, when slavery was officially abolished, quote-unquote, we see that, actually it continued on to 1865, the end of the Civil War. We see that about 10 million African slaves were brought to the New World in order to be, of course, slaves. And so there is about 30% of those 10 million slaves that were Muslims. So you had 3 million Muslims right off the bat, when the population of America was probably, not counting slaves, probably about roughly 20 million, if you were lucky. And then counting all these Muslims, you had a huge chunk of Muslims in the country right from the get-go. Now, it's important to understand then that these African slaves, for the most part, were actually rather educated. There was a stereotype amongst the plantation owners and all these other people who enslaved these slaves that they had no reasoning ability. They had no ability to think. They were not intelligent. Right? This was always a common misconception brought up. And I wanted to focus on someone in particular. He was the first Islamic scholar in America, not Hamza Yusuf. Right? Not Imam Khan. This was the first Islamic scholar in America. And mashallah, when we hear about him, his name was Bilal Muhammad. And he was from the Fulbe tribe. And he was born in the year around 1770 in the city of Timbo, which is now known as Guinea. And he actually studied in West Africa. And he became familiar and he intensively studied hadith, he studied tafsir, and he was fluent in Arabic as well as the Fula language of his tribe. Now, this extensive education also included significant inroads into Maliki fiqh. He was a Maliki fiqh scholar. And he memorized several texts. Among them, I'll mention later, was the Risala of Ibn Abu Zayd. And this was a Maliki fiqh text. And his owner was Thomas Spalding. Now, he was very lucky, and Allah blessed him in this sense, that he was owned by a man named Thomas Spalding. Because Thomas Spalding was a very magnanimous owner. It doesn't seem particularly par for the course, right? When you talk about somebody who's a slave owner, it doesn't seem like you can talk about them and say they're magnanimous. But Thomas Spalding, he generally didn't let his slave workers work more than 6 hours a day. He did not have any white slave drivers who would beat the prisoners, and he allowed them to practice their religions freely. And it's amazing to know that Bilal Muhammad may have well constructed the first musalla in America. The very first place of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in America was built by an African slave. Right here in America, right there in the Sapelo Islands. So not Iowa, as we're often told again, but right here, right down south in the Sapelo Islands. Now the Risala of Ibn Abu Zayd is important because he had memorized this 13-page manuscript, and he actually wrote it from memory. He wrote it from memory so that the other slaves would have some kind of work, some kind of information regarding fiqh matters. And he wrote it out just directly from memory. 13 pages, if you can imagine how difficult that must have been. And how keenly intelligent he must have been to be able to do such a thing. Now, the biggest thing that I always find in talking about Bilal Muhammad, and why I really appreciate him so much, is that when he was a part of Thomas Spalding's plantation, he grew to be the foreman of the plantation, more or less. So basically, he was in charge of managing the slaves and doing everything like that. And so when when the British attacked in the year 1812, of course the War of 1812, as we all know, then Thomas Spalding and his family fled the plantation. They were afraid that something might happen to them. They were afraid of an attack by the British, so they fled the plantation, and he put Bilal Muhammad in charge of his ginormous plantation. Now imagine this in the time and the context of it. This slave is put in charge of an entire plantation in 1812. One slave is in charge of this entire plantation. what can you imagine might happen? He's a slave. Don't you think he wants to be a master again? Don't you think he wants to have his own freedom, his own will? But you know what he understood? You know what Bilal Muhammad understood? Bilal Muhammad had taqwa. And he had fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he knew it was to go, if he was to steal this land, it would be violating the rights of his owner. It would be violating rights that he had upon him based on the trust that was placed in him. So when Thomas Spalding and his family fled and he put Bilal Muhammad in charge of it, the British soldiers came and attacked the farm. And Bilal Muhammad organized them, 80 Muslim slaves. And they all had muskets and they defended the plantation. And when Thomas Spalding and his family came back, he handed him the keys and once again resumed his duties as the foreman of the plantation. That's character. This is somebody who people would have said was a lowlife. He had no value save for what his work was. He would have had no true, and actually if you consider such rulings as the Dred Scott case, if you're familiar with that, where it was said that slaves were not actually people, they were rather property, then this becomes even more amazing in light of that. That this was the kind of person you had who was a slave, just a slave, quote unquote, but he was Muslim. And this fulfillment of that trust is, again, as I mentioned. So, I just mentioned that he is fluent in those languages. Now, moving beyond that, the reemergence of Islam in America had to continue on from there. And it wasn't anything that was, as time went on in the 1800s, the number of Muslims significantly began to drop. And why was this? This was because as there was less material, less ability, no more slaves coming in from Africa, there's a lower number of Muslims in America. So now you're faced with a situation where how do you practice when you don't have up-to-date materials? There's no up-to-date Quran, but how do you have a Quran if you're coming on a slave ship from Africa? They didn't let you carry anything, and the conditions on those ships was horrible. So how do you end up having any kind of Quran, any kind of education? So slowly, people just started to assimilate into Christianity. Now, once in the 20th century, a new movement began to emerge, and it was led by a man named Wallace Fard Muhammad. And I'm sure plenty of people are familiar with him. And this movement was called the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam was a highly altered form of Islam. It shared the name, it shared certain practices, but it was the creed, the actual creed of the religion itself was significantly altered. So it wasn't really truly Islam in that sense. Now, now talking about them as an establishment, they grew rapidly. Wallace Fard Muhammad was very intelligent, and he actually went to prison because of draft dodging. And when he went to prison, he continued to proselytize these young men, these young impressionable men who felt disenfranchised in prison, who felt like they didn't have any real ability to, move themselves up on the social ladder. They didn't have any ability to become someone who controls their own destiny. And so he leaned on them and he brought them into the... So he brought them into the fold of the Nation of Islam. And with the Nation of Islam, again, as I mentioned, it was significantly different. And when he emerged out of prison, he had a huge following now. And they established well over 200 temples across America, which doesn't sound like much, but that's a huge accomplishment. Huge accomplishment. And they became particularly active in the political spectrum. Again, draft dodging was a big thing with them. They said, we're not fighting a white man's war. That's literally what they said. Because Vietnam was happening at the time. So, moving forward, Wallace Fard Muhammad suddenly disappears, and Elijah Muhammad then takes control. And Elijah Muhammad now, he really changed things with the Nation of Islam because he said a couple things. And I have to say, na'udhu billah with them, of course, but he said, first and foremost, na'udhu billah, that Wallace Fard Muhammad was Allah incarnate. Na'udhu billah. And then he said that Elijah Muhammad said that he was a prophet sent down. Na'udhu billah. And from there, it continued on. And Malcolm Little, who was a young man at the time, just being released from prison, serving a prison sentence for burglary, a 6-year sentence, he was very attracted to this message, and he became Elijah Muhammad's protege and became known as Malcolm X. And from there, you had a young, up-and-coming boxer named Cassius Clay, who also found himself attracted to this new movement. Cassius Clay, of course, Muhammad Ali. So why are they important to discuss? Why are they an important aspect to discuss for us? Well, the Nation of Islam was really the first, the first exposure to the mainstream America to the ideas of Islam. Now, the creed was significantly different, but the ideas, some of the practical applications of it were very, very similar. No pork, no drinking. Things like that were very similar. And so this became something of a understanding in America. This is what Islam is. And of course that changed over time, but that led to great notoriety, especially with their political activism. Malcolm X, again, as we know, he branched off from the Nation of Islam because he came to understand that the creed that they were following was incorrect. Again, it's same with Muhammad Ali. And so this helped to build a basic platform for true Islam, for Islam al Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the Nation of Islam became a cause for the largest conversion to mainstream Islam in American history. And how was that? Well, that was because Warith Deen Muhammad, the son of Elijah Muhammad, when Elijah Muhammad passed away, took control and he changed everything. He changed everything. Because when he was in jail for draft dodging, he started studying the Quran. And he realized, you know what, this doesn't make sense. This isn't up to par. This deen is so beautiful. This religion is so beautiful. What have we done to it? And so he began to reject his father. And he began to promote the aspects of Islam that were correct. The Sunni Islam method, he began to promote those. And so he found himself in a state of cognitive dissonance, of course. And then moving from there, when he took control, he dismantled the Nation of Islam as it was known. And he led the largest conversion in U.S. history. More Muslims than any other time converted at once through Warith Deen Muhammad's efforts. So his changes included a variety of different things, such as, again, the creed aspect of it, the theological aspect of it, the black separatist views. He had no problem worshiping with white worshipers, Latino worshipers, any other race. He had no problem worshiping with them because he understood Islam is a religion for all. And then he also encouraged, at the same time, he encouraged African Americans to separate themselves from their backgrounds. Why? Because at the same time, they would still be disenfranchised from what they were doing, through what they were doing. They grew up with these surnames and all these different things as a result of their slave masters and other... Pushing the wrong button. So... Anyway, I can go, but we understand that with them, they were disenfranchised due to the fact that their masters and other people had kept them down for so long. So, then, with that, he also decentralized power, and then he also reached out to other groups, such as Latino Muslims. And I mention this because this is a very important thing. Even today, I can't tell you how many groups there are from us, from mainstream Muslims that might reach out to a Latino Muslim. How many Latino Muslims do you see part of an MSA on a daily basis? Look around. It's very rare. But he reached out to those groups. He built relations with them. And now, of course, moving forward to current day, to present day, and what we're all familiar with, the life that we live, the narrative of Islam in America as we know it. The September 11th attacks brought Islam into a new, very heavily scrutinized light in the digital age. And it's interesting because you see such a heavy ability, such an ability as there was never an ability before to scrutinize Islam, to scrutinize different aspects of it. Now, hate crimes skyrocketed. There was 20 to 30 in 2000. In 2001, over 500. Over 500 hate crimes against Muslims. And from there, you had 100 to 150, you've had 100 to 150 every year, pretty consistently, in terms of hate crimes. So, here's a very strange question that I want to ask, but it has some bearing to it. Was 9/11 actually good for Islam? Well, I can tell you it wasn't good for Muslims in general. Because as a result of 9/11, all of us started to face oppression. We started to face a negative perception. We started to be looked at as outsiders, as people who weren't necessarily American, solely because of the fact that we followed a religion that we find to be true, solely because we follow a religion that we see as the ultimate gift from God. So, we understand that it wasn't necessarily good in that aspect. However, Statistics will tell you an interesting story. It doesn't seem possible, but they show evidence that is otherwise. When people saw these actions, saw these things happening, saw 9/11, heard about Al-Qaeda, they began to wonder, what is this religion? What is this religion that promotes this violence? I want to learn about it so I can know, I can be educated. There's a story of a woman in Michigan who actually in New York, and when she was actually nearby during the September 11th attacks. And after September 11th, she went to a bookstore and she picked up a Quran because she wanted to know, what's the deal? What is this religion? And from when she started and to when she closed the book and finished it, she said, I can't not accept this. I have to accept Islam. Because there's no other, she said, there was too much dissonance otherwise. If I didn't accept Islam, I knew I'd be cheating myself because I knew it was truth and I knew what was happening wasn't reality. So approximately now 20,000 Americans per year convert to Islam every year, about every year since 9/11, post 9/11. And significant with that, the number of people identifying themselves as Muslims has risen about 67% since 9/11. That's a significant number. So moving forward in a post 9/11 world, what does that mean for us? Because this is going to be our world. This is our generation. This is our task. How do we go about moving forward? Well, the significant challenges are particularly in the face of these organizations which destabilize our ability to present one picture of Islam. They destabilize our ability and they build biases in people's hearts, in people's eyes, in people's understandings of what Islam is. Now, ISIS and Al-Qaeda seem like things that you hear about all the time in the news. But what is Masjid al-Nur al-Islam? Masjid al-Nur al-Islam is a masjid in D.C. that allows for homosexuality to be openly practiced. And when people come up to us and say, hey, isn't there a gay mosque in D.C.? What do you got? Why don't you guys accept it? That causes problems for us because how do we explain this now? We have to tell the truth. There is no acceptance for such things in our creed. There is no acceptance for that. And we don't need to apologize for that. That is our creed. But we have to understand that these things are all issues that we have to learn how to discuss. We have to become educated enough to discuss. And how do we, with such broadly different interpretations of Islam, that person's Hanafi, that person's Hanbali, that person's Shafi'i, that person's Salafi. How do we sort out who's going to do what? We're not going to pray Asr because somebody's praying at 4:40 instead of 5:30? That seems to be a common problem from what I hear here. But the truth is that there's really not much that we can do except understand that these differences are okay. These differences in Islam are okay. Ikhtilaf rahmah. Ikhtilaf is rahmah from Allah. And, that's a hadith, and I wanted to mention this, where the Prophet ﷺ said that there is, basically he said, shall I point you to something? You will not believe until you love one another. And you will not love until what? And you will not believe until you love one another. And shall I point you to something that will build love within yourselves? And of course he said yes. So he said, spread salam. Spread salam. And it seems like such a simple concept, but it's actually very difficult. When somebody comes up to me most days and says salam, I don't have a problem saying salam, but a lot of times I might go to someone and say salam, and they're going to say, hey, what's up, bro? Hey, how you doing, man? Hey, hello. So how you doing? Hey, what's up? That's not okay. That's not okay. Spread salams and build love with one another. Spread salams and act like the Prophet ﷺ. Have yourselves in a manner where you put your entire focus on that person like the Prophet ﷺ did. Why do you think so many people loved him? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And moving forward from there, it's dua. Dua is one of the most powerful believers for any believer. It should be powerful weapons for any believer. And why is that? Dua is the thing that connects us directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we make dua, it should not be something where it's like, oh Allah, please, can I have this? If it's alright with you, can I have this car? If it's okay, if it's no big deal, please let me have this. That's not how dua works. When they make dua in winter or any other, Allahumma ansur al-muslimina fi kulli makan. Oh Allah, help the Muslims in every place. Unsur is a command. It's an amr in Arabic, and it's a command. You don't ask Allah like that. You say, Allah, make this happen. And when you ask Him, you have full faith that it's going to happen. You ask Allah for this thing, it's going to happen. No doubt. No doubt. And if it doesn't come to happen at the timeline you expected, alhamdulillah. Moving forward, it'll happen when it's supposed to happen. If it doesn't happen, alhamdulillah, I'll get it in Jannah. That's our attitude. It has to be our attitude. If it's not our attitude, then we say that, well, Allah may or may not give it to us. But Allah promises He always gives to those who believe, who do good works. Now, ad-din, the Arabic on this got really messed up. I think the computer had some trouble with this. But another hadith I want to mention, ad-din al-nasiha. Ad-din al-nasiha means that the religion is well-wishing. The deen is well-wishing. And nasiha is such a word that you can't translate it into English. Just because I say well-wishing, that does not mean that's what it is. Nasiha has such depth, such beauty to it. You can't talk about it in English. So, when you're talking about ad-din al-nasiha, it means the example of Jarir ibn Abdullah, who, when he sent his servant out to buy a horse, he sent his servant out to buy a horse in the market, and the servant came back, he came back and he said, how much did you buy this horse for? It's a good horse. He said, I bought it for 300. He said, no, that's not enough. I can't do that. We have to go back. So he goes back to the market. He finds the brother. And he says, listen, we only paid 300 for this, but this horse is worth a lot more. And right now, I know every single day his ears are burning because talking about paying more money does not seem like a very inviting concept. But this man, he says, okay, listen. How about I give you 350? And the man says, okay. The salesman says, okay. And then from there, he goes, okay, well, no, how about 400? And the guy says, okay. And he says, no, how about 450? Okay. How about 500? All right. No, okay, I think this horse, and they settled about 800. And less settled, the more he decided that it was worth about 800. That's what ad-din al-nasiha is. Ad-din al-nasiha means that we love our brothers and sisters to the point we're willing to do what's best for them, even if it means it's not what's necessarily best for us. Best for us in dunya, though, is a relative term. Best for us means that Allah is happy with us. That's what's best for us. It doesn't mean that we have less money or we have more money in the bank account. And we have to understand that if there are so many other groups out there that do such things, if you look at the Oriental dollar, there was a study done. And when I say Oriental dollar, I mean the dollar that Korean Americans or Chinese Americans or Japanese Americans spend. It goes between themselves. The Oriental dollar travels between themselves 17 times before it goes outside on average. 17 times. And from there, if you look at Muslims going down the list, we're at about 7 or 8. But I can guarantee you almost every single one of those is like pulling teeth. And you get to the point, what is the deal with these guys now? What are they doing? They're supporting each other. They're building each other up. And that's what you see. There's so many guys driving Mercedes. So many guys who are, live in these huge houses who are doing so much better. Why? Because everyone's supporting each other. There's a group called Ismailis, and what do they do? There's 4 support the 5th. So, all of them, there's 4 people who are established here. One person's coming from Pakistan. They establish a business, and what do? When they establish this business, they put it in that guy's name. And then he comes here with a running business. And what does he do? He works that business, and he pays them off, and he's established now. He's got money, he's got a car, he's got a house. He's all set. He's straight. And moving forward, he doesn't have to do anything except pay them back, and now they're stronger. He can be another 4th person. So, for us, what we have to really start to do is be better than even that. If we're going to move forward in America as a cohesive group, as one group, then we have to understand that we have to stick together. Should we separate? Should we be divided? You're going to see more and more instances of Muslims being attacked, more and more instances of Muslims being put to shame, more and more instances of people being told off and feeling like they have to shave off their beard, have to take off their hijab, have to move away from Islam to be safe. You think that if you're supported by 3 other guys, if I got Umar and Habib and Muhammad on the bus with me, you think I'm going to feel nervous? When some guy comes up to me and says, hey boy, what are you doing? You think I'll feel nervous? You think a girl will feel nervous if she has her 3-4 friends with her? If we support each other and build each other up, then we only get richer for it. we only become better for it. And like the Muhajirin and the Ansar, radiallahu anhum, you can see their example. When the Muhajirin came from Mecca, the Ansar were established, they were set, but they gave them half their wealth. They gave them all that they needed to establish and settle themselves. And the Muhajirin, they were hard workers and they really wanted to put their time in, get their nose in the dirt and work. And they did it. And what happened? The reason we stand here today is first and foremost Allah's grace, and second because of those guys' sacrifices, those guys' efforts. But it only happened because they were together. There's no jealousy between them, no envy, no rivalry, no hatred. No, he does Rafa Yadayn and he doesn't, so I'm going to support this guy and I'm not going to support that guy. It's about sticking together no matter what the problem is, no matter what the issue is, and being as we are supposed to be. Like Allah says, hold fast to the rope of Allah. Oh man, this is going to be a lot harder to read now. Hold fast to the rope of Allah and don't separate. Don't separate, Allah says. The only thing we can do, and in this verse it's talking about Aus and Khazraj, who were the two groups of the Ansar, two tribes, who had like this huge bad blood between them. And Allah said you were on the edge of the fire, and you almost fell in, but Allah saved you from it. So He made your hearts close. So what do? Right now, if we want to talk about an edge of a fire, we're in that place every day. Because somebody's looking to push us down, push us down, push us down. So how do we pick ourselves up? We do it with our brothers and sisters right next to us. We do it by knowing that Allah answers our du'as if we do them properly. And we do it by making sure that no matter what, whether this person does this in salah, whether this person does that in salah, whether this person likes to pray asr at that time, that person likes to pray asr at this time, that we don't separate. And we stay as one ummah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended. Inshallah, I just want to, from there I'm just going to move on, and that's it for me. So, jazakumullah khair again to the MSA, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all your efforts, and jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Brother Arch, for the perspectives that you shared with us, and that tons of knowledge about the history of America and the history of Southern America. So our next speaker coming up is Shaykh Yaseen from the Islamic Society of Baltimore. He completed his Hafidh at age 14, and he proceeded to complete his Alim studies at London Madrasa, and then he got his master's degree in Islamic studies. He came here to the Plano Masjid in Texas, and then moved on to become the resident scholar and the director of ISP Seminary. You may remember him from the Divine Mercy this time last year. Please welcome everyone, Shaykh Yaseen.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى اما بعد فاعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ان تنصروا الله ينصركم ويثبت اقدامكم يا ايها الذين امنوا ان تنصروا الله ينصركم ويثبت اقدامكم صدق الله العظيم. Firstly, I'd like to begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asking Allah to bless this gathering and send his blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions and all the followers till the last day. Hafidh just gave you a good presentation, and it's going to be a very difficult act to follow with his charismatic presence and his demeanour, and obviously I'm more monotone and boring. But trust the Americans to call a brick to tell you how Muslims are in America and what the political situation of Muslims are in America. That's something that we don't usually see people from different countries commentating on what our situation is. Of course, when you've been living amongst a community for a very long time, then your observations and your experiences and your interactions with people teach you a lot of things. So today I've been asked to speak about a subject that is quite detailed and very vast. It's not a very specific topic that can be pinpointed. And I've been asked to speak about the political situation of Muslims in America, despite not being a political analyst or somebody who studied political science or any of that. I'm probably as aware as you are regarding the Muslim community in America in terms of what the situation is politically and the challenges that we face, simply because everybody today gets their news from social media. And I'm sure most of you spend more time on social media than I do. I can vouch for a couple of people I know for a fact spend more time on social media than I do. So I'm sure you're all aware of the political situation facing Muslims today in America. Now, the question is, are Muslims connected politically or not connected politically? Are Muslims connected, are they civically engaged or are they not civically engaged? This is a very important question. And it's a question that we need to all ask ourselves. The second thing we need to ask ourselves is, what helps a person become more civically motivated? What makes a person more motivated to get engaged politically and also in a civic manner in his community? Then I want to also touch upon the current situation of Muslims in this land and what our duties and responsibilities are towards those around us, because it's a very important topic that we need to discuss, inshallah. If you look around us today, you will find that, alhamdulillah, by Allah's grace and mercy, you will find Muslims in almost every state in the country, and mostly in the major cities you will definitely find a Muslim community. Muslims in many different parts of the country are very heavily engaged, sometimes in the political sense and sometimes in they're civically engaged. In fact, a study was taken on the attendance of Muslims in mosques and how that impacts their engagement with the wider community. And this study was done in particular after 2011, when Peter King wanted to hold an inquiry against Muslims and the role of Muslims in this country and how their religiosity may be leading to their extremism or their violence. Because there is an understanding amongst some politicians and also, especially amongst media experts and some of those activists, that the silent Muslims, the Muslims that are silent, that don't speak up very often, are somehow tacitly approving terrorism and extremism and violence. So there is an understanding amongst people, and this is an irrational fear that is spread by people of different backgrounds, and it's all part of the same network that is committed to spreading fear in people's minds and people's hearts. There is actually a paper called the Roots of the Islamophobia Network. And I would encourage you to look for it, search for it online and read it. It's about 150 to 200 pages long. It's called The Roots of the Islamophobia Network, and at the beginning of that paper they have broken down the different groups and different types of groups that are actively engaged in spreading hatred and bigotry and Islamophobia. So some of them are politicians, then you have activists, you also have some scholars that are, and think tanks that are campaigning certain views, or they're the ones who come up with certain views and ideas, and they have the media outlets spewing all this hatred for them, doing their work for them. And some of these think tanks are heavily funded by individuals that are very wealthy. So there's a whole network of people working, plotting, planning, conspiring to spread hatred or a distrust towards Muslims in this country. And I'm sure you might be aware of the political situation of Muslims in Europe, especially after the Charlie Hebdo incident that took place in January. Especially in England, if you're aware of the politics around the world, you will learn that recently there's been a strategy called the Prevent strategy that was introduced, I believe, under the Tony Blair regime. And it's something that has been gaining much more ground recently. A new bill called the Counter-Terrorism Bill, the CTS Bill. Now, what they're doing is they're targeting average, normal Muslims who go to the mosque and people that don't have any element of violence in them. But what they're saying is non-violence or non-violent Muslims are creating violence. I mean, they approve it. Non-violent Muslims or practicing Muslims that are non-violent are a cause for violent extremism. I'm sure you're aware that in recent times in Europe as well, and also in England specifically, quite a few nutters, okay, decided to go and join ISIS. Did you hear about that? Did you hear about the jihadi brides? You did? 4 young girls from East London decided to become brides for some of the ISIS soldiers. So they left their homes, the comfort of their homes, they sold their jewellery. Okay, which girl does that? Okay, sold their jewellery, and they bought tickets and they went all the way to Syria to join some of the ISIS soldiers. So, because of this extremism that exists among some people, there is now an irrational sort of extension of that extremism towards any Muslim. So basically, any Muslim that is practicing, and he's non-violent. Practicing, how do you define that? How do you define practicing? It's such a vague and ambiguous term. It's such a vague term, because when you say somebody is a practicing Muslim, what does that mean? How would you consider someone a practicing Muslim? If he's praying 3 salat a day, is he a practicing Muslim? He's half practicing, right? If someone wears a thobe but he doesn't pray, is he practicing? In the eyes of the people, he is, right? If somebody has a beard, or somebody wears a hijab and she's not praying, in the eyes of the people, they think that's a practicing person. So now, what this has done, this CTS bill and the prevent strategy, what it's done is it's made everyone a target. It's allowed the government to have, without any shackles or without any rules governing their strategy, to profile any individual. So any individual can be profiled based on the fact that they're Muslim and they attend the mosque. And the fear is that such a strategy may be introduced in the country that we're living in the United States of America. If such strategies are deployed in Europe and also in England, then I don't see any reason why such strategies won't be deployed here in a few years' time. So it's important for us to be politically engaged so that we can prevent such strategies being deployed here. So we can prevent such circumstances to arise for Muslims. As Hafidh has already mentioned to you about the situation surrounding Muslims after 9/11, I briefly touched upon some of the irrational fear towards Muslims. It's very important in light of all of this that we understand the importance of engaging politically. Now, politically you have a choice of how you want to engage and how to make an influence. Generally, the most simple way of making an influence is by voting. And of course, now all of you who have reached the age of 18, you'll be eligible to vote. It's very important that you exercise your right to vote. And when you exercise your right to vote, it's important to vote for individuals who will be more sympathetic towards the stance of Muslims in this country or the causes of Muslims and their grievances in their country. Besides that, Muslims have a choice of funding political campaigns as well, because the lobbying that takes place for political candidates requires a lot of funds. It requires a lot of money. So it's important that Muslims also be engaged financially by supporting candidates who will be favourable towards Muslim causes in this country. And the third way of being engaged politically, which is a difficult one, is to not control but have an influence on what the media publicises, what the media sends out, the message the media sends out. This is a very, very long road. But if you look around this country, you'll find certain communities that are very, very powerful. And the reason why they're powerful, the reflection of their power is that they have so much influence on the media that the media can't defame them or publicise anything negative towards that community. And we all know about the power that some communities hold. So it's important that Muslims start to somewhat, not control, but have an influence on the message that the media is sending out. This is important for us to understand this. Now, in the last many decades, Muslims were involved, but mostly Muslims' involvement was in civil rights matters. So we had organisations like CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, working very hard for the civil rights of Muslims in this country. but there wasn't much involvement on many different levels. But in the last decade or so, we've seen a huge rise in Muslims being very, very actively engaged politically as well. You have organizations like ISNA, MPAC, and other organizations that are representing Muslims that are very heavily engaged with the politicians, the lawmakers, the congressmen, the senators, and the city councilmen, etc. It's important that these ties are established, because if we don't have ties established and we become an insular community, what happens is we become lambs to the slaughter. We become lambs to the slaughter, we become very easy prey. And if you look around historically, you will find any community that became insular and isolated, they were wiped out very quickly. They were subject to genocides and they were subject to many different forms of torture that wiped out their existence in those lands. So it's important that we understand this point, that we have to be politically engaged in order for us to succeed or make any ground in this country. We've also seen in the last few years a huge rise in political activists and activists in general amongst the Muslim communities. And we have also seen a rise in lawyers and attorneys that are advocating for the rights of Muslims and for the treatment, good treatment towards Muslims in this country. There's a group out of Southern California of Muslim lawyers that are very actively engaged in this sort of work. So this is just an example of how far Muslims have come, and there's so much more to do and there's so much more room for us to grow. Now, one of the problems that we have as a community is that we tend to only choose careers that will profit us as individuals. And this is a huge problem that we have. If you grow up in a typical Muslim household, you must have heard your parents dream that you become a doctor, or you become a lawyer, or you choose a career path that's very lucrative, that's going to bring a lot of money for you. Can anybody, I'm going to ask you guys a question, who's been raised in a household like that? Wow, that's a lot, alright? Almost 75% of everybody sitting here. Okay, so basically, that's the problem. The problem is that we are only seeking positions and careers that are going to benefit us financially as individuals. Now, why not choose career paths that are going to help us and also help the communities around us? How many Muslims do we see taking career paths like that? Very few. And even the few that do choose career paths like that, their parents generally feel that he was a lost cause in the family. All the rest went to med school, and this boy, he chose to go to work for Islam. Right? This is the sort of attitude that Muslim parents have towards any of their children taking a career path other than something that they desired for them, which was going to be lucrative for them. So it's important that we think about this. How am I going to benefit the community and society? Look, we don't need to be a well-oiled and well-drilled money-making machine. There are plenty of people doing that today. There are plenty of people who are part of that cycle and part of that system. All their uses to the money, to the corporations, is making money for them. Now, our purpose of learning and our purpose of studying isn't to make money. That's just a benefit. It's a bonus. And of course, earning money, we have to, because we need to exist in this world. We need to live comfortably as well, at least. But the important thing is, what do you do with that education that you gain? And how are you impacting the lives of people around you? And how are you impacting the cause of Muslims in this land? What can you do with your education to help Muslims in this country? So it's very important. One of the things that I would like to suggest personally is that when you're in your 20s, for example, or you're in college, university, whatever career path you want to take, find a successful Muslim that has succeeded in that career path and ask them to become a mentor for you, to give you advice, to guide you along that path. It's so important. And there are many, many people willing to share their expertise and network like this. So we need to pinpoint and identify people within our communities that have taken similar career paths, that are succeeding in it, and they are also giving back to the community, so we can become people like that, we can replicate that. And this is a very important thing. We need to try to plug into that. One of the things that I was mentioning earlier about Peter King and his the congressional hearings against Muslims, and the fact that Muslims were being suspected because of their silence, of being violent extremists. After that, there was a study done by some non-Muslim professors. Because if there were Muslim professors, people might say, okay, they're biased. The non-Muslim professors carried out a study stating that the more a Muslim attends the masjid and the mosque, the more he is politically engaged and the more he is civically engaged. The more a Muslim participates in the mosque and the mosque activities and prayer at the mosque, the closer he is to the political goals of the country and the closer he is to civic engagement. And this is very important, becoming a civic Muslim. And this ties into what I wanted to speak about regarding our role as Muslims in this country. One of the things we need to think about, look, if you look at the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's life, who is our role model, and we look at the prophetic model, he was engaged in inviting people towards God's message for a very long time. And he worked day and night, tirelessly, to invite people towards salvation and the truth. Now, how many years did he live in Mecca before he migrated to Medina as a prophet? How many years was it? Anybody? Sorry? Anyone? From the age of 40 till the age of 53. At the age of 40 he received prophethood, and he lived in Mecca for how many years after that? 13 years. Then in Medina he lived for 10 or 11 years. But I want to concentrate on the 13 years plus the first 7 years in Medina. During this period of time of 20 years, the Prophet, peace be upon him, invited people towards Islam day and night. He went through many sacrifices, many trials and tribulations, persecution, torture, oppression, you name it, boycotts, social boycotts, the Muslims face as a community. These were the sacrifices that the Prophet endured during his Meccan period and the first 7 years of his Medinan period. What were the results? Very less. Not a lot of people became Muslim in the first 20 years. Despite the tireless efforts of the Prophet, peace be upon him, not many people became Muslim. Now, from the 7th to the 11th year of the Prophet's life in Medina, 4 years, troves of people became Muslim. Groups and groups became Muslim. And Allah speaks about this in chapter 110 of the Quran. In chapter 110, Allah says, when the help of Allah comes, you will see people entering the faith in troves, group after group. وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. One of the great hadith scholars, his name was Imam Zuhri, rahmahullah, a great scholar of hadith in the first century of Islam. He says, why do you think that people didn't embrace Islam in the first 20 years like they did in the last 4 years of the Prophet's life? Why is it that people were attracted to Islam in the last 4 years of the Prophet's life in comparison to the first 20 years? It's a very interesting point he made. He says the reason for that was, in the first 20 years, Muslims were in a very, very unique situation where they were being tortured, they were being oppressed, they were boycotted, they were somewhat isolated, and the result of that was Muslims were unable to interact with people of other faiths and influence their ideas and their thoughts and their practices. So in the first 20 years of Islam, there were not many instances of interaction where people could learn from Muslims or see their character and their conduct and their dealings. It was after the 7th year in the Prophet's Medinan life, 4 years before he passes away, that Muslims gained some stability politically and as a community. And when they gained that stability, this was an opportunity for people to really interact with Muslims. And when they started interacting with Muslims, they were attracted to the faith. They were attracted to the faith. And that's why we see examples of people like Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu and Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, who were two very prominent companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, his opponents, who fought against him for many years. But when there was peace, when they had the chance to really interact with Muslims and see their character, it immediately attracted them to Islam. and they came peacefully themselves in the 7th year, and they converted to Islam, and they... Now, what I'm saying to you is very important here, and this message is for myself and also for yourself. We can have big buildings, we can have nice institutions, we can have all the... Look at the example of Muslims in Spain. If you want to see glory in history, you look at the rule of Muslims in Spain, and you see how much progress they made and the advancements they made. When Muslims came to Spain, they were so advanced, and for almost 8 centuries they ruled Andalus, the area of the Iberian Peninsula. You're talking about Spain and Portugal and those countries. But at that time, despite the fact that Muslims built beautiful mosques, and the Mosque of Cordoba is a very famous one, despite the fact that Muslims produced some of the brightest intellectuals in world history, some of the greatest pioneers in Islamic knowledge, such as Qudsi rahimahullah, Shatibi, Ibn Hazm, Ibn Abd al-Barr, all these great Spanish scholars that were produced during the Muslim rule of Spain. And despite Spain being a center of learning under Muslim rule, and despite the liberties that non-Muslim communities enjoyed under Muslim rule in Spain, there was one very big problem amongst the Muslims. And that big problem amongst the Muslims was one of sectarianism. And sectarianism and nationalism kills a community. Sectarianism and nationalism kills a community. If we want to succeed as Muslims in this country, we have to get rid of our cultural baggage that we have. We can't call ourselves Pakistani, Indian, Bengali, Arab, and Arabs as well. Within the Arabs you have Jordanian, and I'm Palestinian, and I am Egyptian, and I am this, and I'm Saudi, and I'm Yemeni, and I'm Shami, and I'm from Maghreb, and I'm Tunisia, and Libya, and all these Aljazair. We can't have all of this nationalism. We're Muslims. We're Muslims, and we're united with the kalima la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. If we really want to succeed, we have to be united. And we have to display the character of Muslims. The sterling qualities that the Prophet ﷺ had, and the sterling qualities that he embedded within his companions, he instilled in their lives. If we hold those characters to us dear, and if we learn Islam truly, and we cut it off from the cultural baggage that is attached to it, and we really learn the authentic Islam, and we adopt those characteristics and traits, people will be attracted to the faith of Islam. Now, people rejected the message of the Prophet Muhammad. Even in his time, people rejected his message, but nobody could say anything negative about his character. People rejected Islam, but they could never say anything negative about the character of Muslims. In fact, it is said by the ulama and the scholars that if the Prophet displayed no miracles, and the only thing he had to show was his companions, then that would be the greatest miracle. Because the way that the Prophet transformed the lives of these people that were so backwards, that were so downtrodden, that were so ignorant, when the light of Islam penetrated their hearts and entered their souls, when they adopted the true teachings of the Quran and the morals and ethics displayed in the Sunnah and the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they became guiding and shining lights. To the extent that nobody could say anything negative against their character. Can the same be said about us? Let's ask ourselves as individuals. Reflect upon your own character. When people see us and meet us, do we leave an impression on them? When we meet people and we speak to them, do we do so with respect? When the Prophet Muhammad's character is recorded in the hadith, peace be upon him, the narrator is saying that the Prophet never spoke in a harsh manner. He would never shouted and screamed. He was always polite. In fact, if you look at the sterling qualities he displayed with the companion Anas, may Allah be pleased with him, Anas radiallahu anhu says, the Prophet never once scolded me. And Anas, he lived with the Prophet for 10 years. He was with the Prophet for 10 years. And not once did the Prophet ever say to him, Anas, Why did you do that? Why didn't you do that? This is what he says, Anas radiallahu anhu. In fact, when the Prophet Muhammad was writing letters to non-Muslim rulers and kings, he was displaying such high levels of respect in the way he was addressing them. For example, the letter he sent to Heraclius, who was the leader of the Romans. He wrote in that letter, Min Muhammadin Rasulillahi ila Hiraqla Adim al-Rum. This letter is from Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, to Heraclius, the great emperor of Rome. The great emperor. So the Prophet is giving him the respect that his own people are giving him. This was a display of good character. Now, when the emperor receives the letter, immediately he inquires about anyone from the Prophet's region within his town. And who was there? Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan, who till then was an opponent of Islam, he opposed the Prophet, he fought against him. He happened to be in that town. He happened to be in that town at the time. Heraclius, he calls him to the palace, to his kingdom, and he asks him, do you know this man Muhammad? He said, yes, we know him. Then he starts asking him questions about the character of the Prophet Muhammad. Abu Sufyan responds accurately and doesn't tell any lies. But later on he makes a statement and he says, if it wasn't for my companions with me in this journey, if it wasn't for them scolding me afterwards, I would have spoken some lies. But what we're seeing here is that people were forced to accept the great character of the Prophet ﷺ despite being his opponents, despite not liking him. And the loyalty of his companions was so great that people who saw his companions, they remarked, we have never seen people love an individual like the companions of Muhammad love him and respect him. This is the sort of character that we need to embody. This is the sort of personality that we need to speak about. We need to understand that without sacrifice we can never succeed. The earlier Muslims went through many, many sacrifices. In fact, if you open the Quran and you go to Surah Al-Ankabut, which is in the 20th juz, it's very beautiful because at the beginning of this chapter of Ankabut, Allah is mentioning the importance of mujahada, which means a struggle. Allah is speaking about the fact that you would be trialed, you would face tribulations, you would face tests. And that facing a test from Allah is not a sign of failure. And having wealth and prosperity is not a sign of success either. These are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to people as He wishes. And if people have wealth and they have prosperity and they have peace, it's only a matter of time that could change. So we need to really reshift our focus. Because wealth and prosperity is not a sign of success. But this surah, Surah Ankabut, is interesting because Allah Ta'ala begins this surah by mentioning the sacrifices that we have to endure due to your faith. And another interesting point is that it comes in the Quran after Surah Al-Qasas. Surah Al-Qasas is a surah chapter that speaks in great detail about the story of Moses, Musa alayhi salam. And the fact that Musa alayhi salam, for him to succeed, he had to go through a lot of sacrifice. The people of Moses, for them to escape from Pharaoh, they had to go through much struggle and sacrifices. So it's a nice preface for the next surah, the next chapter of Ankabut, in which Allah is telling us very clearly that you will be trialed. You will be trialed, just like the people were trialed before you. So don't think that you will say La ilaha illallah and everything will be rosy. Don't think that because you say La ilaha illallah and you become Muslim, you won't face hardships. So my message is very clear. We have to be politically engaged. The situation of Muslims isn't so bad here. I know there's some, like for example, in recent times you may have heard of some states banning Sharia law. Well, what does that mean, banning Sharia law? I didn't know Sharia law even existed here. Is there Sharia law in America? No, what they mean by banning Sharia law is any foreign contracts made will not be recognized in an American court. That's what they mean by banning Sharia law. So say for example, somebody gets married in a Muslim country and he has a marriage contract from that country and he brings it to the United States of America, and then unfortunately he decides to separate from his wife, now he asks that his marriage be dissolved according to Islamic law. So what this banning Sharia law actually means is, if this contract, this foreign contract, violates the rights of one of the parties that they would be entitled to under American law, then that contract won't be recognized. That's basically what it means. Banning foreign law, basically, banning foreign contracts. And it's not the first time in history that practices or displays of dress or displays of different religious practices have been banned. You know, in the state of Washington, I remember reading once, in the state of Washington, teachers were not allowed to wear headscarves. And this was a long time ago. This wasn't because of Muslims, but this is because they didn't want Catholics to be in teaching positions. For Catholics. Okay? So Catholics face a lot of the tribulations in this country, just like Jews did. And now the Muslim is the elephant in the room. Right? Now it's time for Muslims to go through some difficulties in this country. So the message is very simple. We need to be more engaged politically. We need to know what's going on in our towns and our cities. Vote when we have to vote. Support candidates who are favourable towards Muslims. What we need to do as individuals is choose a career path that's going to benefit us and benefit the community around us. How we can be more impactful, how we can be civic Muslims. It's very important. Be more engaged in our local communities. In order for us to be more engaged, we need to equip ourselves with knowledge of Islam as well, so we can represent it correctly. And then, of course, we need to be engaged in da'wah. Where we're living right now, the ground is fertile. It's very, very open for us to make da'wah, positive da'wah. Very open. There's no prohibition for us to go and speak to people and to talk to them about the beauty of Islam. But the best form of da'wah will be our character. The best form of da'wah will be the way that we present Islam to people. Because actions speak much louder than words. Actions speak much louder than words. We can speak beautifully, eloquently, nicely, and we may impress someone, we may have an impact on them, and we might affect their hearts. But our conduct and our character will have a far-fetching and far more effective impact on them. So it's important that we think about this very carefully, about our own character. How do we conduct ourselves? When we are out in public, we must think that I'm a Muslim. And the way I portray myself as a Muslim, it will come back towards other Muslims. And people will start to generalize if I'm behaving or if I'm misbehaving or behaving in an unorderly manner. It's important that we rectify ourselves, improve our character, and understand the importance of da'wah. We have to earn our place in this country. It's important that we remember that. We need to earn ourselves in this country. If we think that we can be Muslims that go to the masjid and pray and we won't be involved with the community and we'll be fine, that's not going to be the case. If you think to yourself that I'm just going to pray and be a Muslim, go to the masjid and pray and that's it, and you don't get involved with the community and we become insular and we become isolated, then we're calling trouble upon ourselves. Because there are many communities in the past, around the world, that were isolated. They chose to stay isolated. They were insular. They didn't integrate with people. They didn't interact with people. And what happened to them? They were destroyed by others. It's important that we make allies, we make friends, we make associates with people of other faiths. And this is what the Prophet himself did in Medina. And I think that when we look at our situation as Muslims here right now, in America, it's very similar to the situation of Muslims in the earlier period. Because in the earlier period, before leadership, before Muslims became a leading force in Arabia, Muslims went through a lot of sacrifices. And during that time, the Prophet Muhammad, when he moved to Medina, the city of Medina, he drew a very, very important charter of rights, the Bill of Rights, with other faith communities. And I'm sure you've heard about the Charter of Medina, the Mithaq of Medina, the Charter of Medina. Never in the history of mankind had such a charter been drawn that the Prophet ﷺ drew up when he went to Medina. He invited neighbouring faith communities and they established a peace treaty that they should respect one another, there would be freedom of religious practice, that they would help each other against any enemy that attacks their town. They would not aid any enemy to attack any of their communities within the city. This was a very beautiful charter that was drawn up. So this is an example of the Prophet making allies and friends and associates amongst different communities. We have to do the same. For example, we have other ethnic groups in this country that have been through a lot of trials and tribulation, have been through a lot of difficult periods in history, like the African American community, like the Latino community. As Muslims, we have to build relationships with other groups that have been through similar struggles, if not much worse than the struggles that we face as a community. Learn from them, but somebody has to have our back. If we don't make relationships with people, we don't build ties with people, who speaks for us? Who is speaking for us? And who has our back? That's why it's important for us to galvanize as a community, come together, be united in our cause. As Hafidh was mentioning earlier, we don't have time for all of these differences, too many differences. Some differences are okay. If they're related to matters of jurisprudence, it's okay, because they don't have much of a bearing on anything, on our existence as Muslims. But other differences based on race, based on language, nationalism, none of that has any room in Islam. And forget it doesn't have any room in Islam, it doesn't help our cause as Muslims in this country. The only way that us as a community can be stable and strong here is if we get rid of all of those sectarian issues that exist within our community. I'm not going to take any more time because we're well over time. So, inshallah, this time will not live as well. I hope, inshallah, this talk was of benefit to everybody. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all your efforts and barakallahu lakum. وَقَرْآنَ عَظِيمٌ وَنَفَعَنَا وَإِيَّاكُمْ بِآيَاتِهِ الْحَكِيمِ إِنَّهُ تَعَالَى جَوَادٌ كَرِيمٌ مَلِكٌ ضَرَّوْفٌ رَحِيمٌ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوهُ إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ.
Let's get a round of applause. It's always nice when your speaker comes up and starts telling you why you should be speaking on the topic, right? So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of what Shaykh Yaseen told us resonates deeply with us about, taking control of our narrative, not letting other people decide what we're going to be called, right? And, kind of controlling our own story, being in charge of it. And in addition, the last point that he made at the end about relearning civil rights, many people have been through the struggle, most obviously the African American community in this country. It's very clear that we're not the first community to struggle in terms of civil rights issues. So as we progress, it's clear that there's a lot of models for us to learn from. And with that, we're going to wrap up the speaking portion. We're going to move over to Salat al-Maghrib. We're going to pray Maghrib. It's probably going to take about 10-15 minutes. And following that, we have a few messages from Helping Hands and the Prince George County Muslim Council. And then we're going to do a brief Q&A. We don't have a lot of time for it, but we're still going to try to get a few questions in. And that is the remainder of our program. Let's go ahead and start Salat al-Maghrib.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وإن تبدوا ما في أنفسكم أو تخفوه يحاسبكم به الله فيغفر لمن يشاء ويعذب من يشاء والله على كل شيء قدير آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
Thank you so much, guys. Let's return to our seats. Let's keep the program moving. We have a quick word from Naveed Ahmed, who's full-time employed at Helping Hands, I think. But yeah, we have a quick message from Helping Hands regarding their work and their interest in the program. Let's pass it on.
Assalamu everyone. Welcome everybody to your halftime shot listening. Alright, now that's from Helping Hands. So many of you here, just by a show of hands, how many of you guys have heard of Helping Hands? Alright, pretty much about half, more than half of them. That's good. Let's get into it. Alright, so just like how Harris mentioned, I believe it was Harris, he mentioned during his speech, just about how, actually no, Ahmed mentioned when he was bringing up Shaykh Yaseen. So he was mentioning how like last year, right around this time, in fact tomorrow will make the 1 year anniversary of Divine Mercy, a fundraiser we had with Helping Hands just last year, that the MSA cabinet of last year put together. One of the main guys who's, I mean of course a lot of people had a huge impact on that event, but one of the main guys that had the event come together, spearheading that entire process was Assad Mahal we have over here, our last year's vice president. So he was a key factor for that wonderful event. So anyway, going back to Helping Hands. For those of you who are not familiar with Helping Hands, as the title may suggest, it is a relief organization under the umbrella of IGNA, Islamic Center of North America. Helping Hand, along with its sister organization, IGNA Relief, which also Saad Malik now works for, he just started last month. So we have those two. So pretty much the goal and the objective of Helping Hand, assigned by IGNA, is that they do the relief work overseas. So anytime you hear about tsunamis or typhoons or earthquakes or droughts or whatever happening in Haiti, in Palestine, in Pakistan, in Syria, in Burma, wherever it might be, for the most part Helping Hand is there on site. And that's the same question that people usually ask, what does Helping Hand do in the US? Well, like I mentioned just a few moments ago, we're not designated in the US. We have our offices over here all across the US, but our work is overseas. IGNA Relief, on the other hand, and so I can talk about this either tonight or some other day, they do their work in the US. So from feeding the homeless, from whatever that needs to be done all across the US in various localities and states, that's what they do. So bearing that in mind, and now that we have the summer among us in about a couple of weeks to a month, Helping Hand has this annual program, along with many others, of a summer internship program. So during the summer months, pretty much May 25th until July 31st, pretty much after everybody here is done the semester, we have our summer internship program right over here. By the way, we have a table right in the back. If you can see, it says nicely Helping Hand USA in blue. So on your way out or during the rest of the time, you can stop by, feel free. So we have this summer internship program, and in fact, our own president here, Brother Ahmed Mahmoud, he actually interned last summer for Helping Hand. So I mean, I think there's no other better guy to ask about how that experience was than your own president. So, again, like how many of us looking around the room have done many volunteer work, have organized events, fundraisers, activities, arranged transportation for pickup and drop for speakers. That's pretty much the gist of the work. And again, asking Ahmed, he can probably give you a more breakdown of what it is. And since we have a little bit on in the summer, in the peak summer, actually these days for the next couple of years, a lot of the work will be revolving around Ramadan, from organizing iftars, from fundraising at various massajids, centers, MSAs. You might see Helping Hand in a lot of different places. And that's the main thing. Our regional coordinator, Brother Asif Khan, who is in fact the father of Asif Khan, the events coordinator here at the MSA, that's pretty much one of his main visions that he always tells me and other people who work with Helping Hand and enter with Helping Hand, that he's more like a visual kind of a guy. He wants Helping Hand to be present wherever it's possible and to do their best to recruiting students, not only students, but other workers and helpers and volunteers, inshallah. So that's pretty much a little bit about Helping Hand. And again, where Khalid is sitting right now, I'll switch spots with him. Well, he's not going to come on the mic, but I'll get over there and he'll get somewhere else in the crowd. But I'll be back there, and we have various information on the table, so feel free to stop by about the internship program for setting that up and more information, and for other information as well. And lastly, as I mentioned, IGNA, we have our annual convention coming up. The IGNA convention, Memorial Weekend, May 23rd, 24th, 25th, will be taking place again after our semesters are over. So it's a great time for all of us to kickstart our summer vacations by taking on this amazing conference. Taking for myself and anyone else who's attended a convention in the last year or years before, I'm sure we can all easily say that it's an amazing conference and a convention. From picking up the speakers, from the venue, from just all the talks that they do and the various programs they have, from the bazaar and other attractions, things like that. It's an amazing weekend. And since it's a national holiday weekend, we have an even better reasons to be there. And besides the fact that it's right here, 10 minutes down 95 in the Baltimore Convention Center. So, along with that, we are looking for a lot of volunteers as well. And also I have a laptop there, and I have a sheet over there for signing up for volunteers. And one of the brothers in charge of this area, Dr. Mohsen Ansari, by the way, please keep him in your du'as. He just recovered from a procedure he had last month. And alhamdulillah, he's doing very well now, but just make dua that he gets back to his best self that he was before the surgery, and then inshallah he can benefit all of us around here because he's an amazing person. So anyway, we had a meeting with us at his house a few days ago, myself, Saad Malik, Qudsi, a few of us, other people from ISP, and so we've been pretty much designated like other stuff to do for IFNA. Okay, I have 1 minute. Sorry. So anyway, so pretty much we're needs of various things for IFNA. This includes airport duties like pick and drop off of speakers, registration, we all know how hectic that can be for thousands of people, daycare / babysitting, and my personal favorite, and of course Mufti's personal favorite, the prayer responsibilities in terms of organizing the salon, taking care of the prayer mats, and all of that stuff. So pretty much again, Rahmah is sitting, I'll take a spot after I'm done here. We have various duties for everyone to partake in, and aside from those 4 categories, we have other categories as well. So whatever you think you can help with, please feel free to sign up. And if you don't want to volunteer at all, attend a conference. Take it from me, take it from anybody else. It's an amazing conference, and an amazing time for all of us to, kickstart our summer, and so inshallah we can benefit ourselves and everyone on the show. Okay? I'll give you guys a shout out, but it's quiet for that. I'm just going to drop the mic.
Thank you, Naveed, for that superfluously detailed rant. Next we have Brother Jamil Johnson from the Prince George's County Muslim Council. He's going to be sharing some practical tips regarding the kind of activism and civic engagement that we're talking about. And following that, we'll have a quick Q&A session, and then you guys are all free to go to the
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan for inviting me here. My thanks is the time I'm inviting me here. I want to just quickly speak on, and I'm going to do it before we start playing the come-off music or start clapping because I'm doing about 8 minutes. As he said, I'm with the Prince George's County Muslim Council, which is a civic political organization whose mission is to get the Muslim community, particularly in Prince George's, involved in the civic and political affairs of the county. The purpose of which is to improve our way of life and also to improve the quality of life for all our neighbors. Just to give you a quick background about myself, I've worked for 2 members of Congress. I worked for one in New York, but I was a little older than some of you guys. And then I spent 10 years working as chief of staff for another member of New York. And now I've spent the last 7 years as a lobbyist. That's actually not a bad word. In Prince George's County, our goal is to, we handle this by doing the 3 things. One, we want to work on the issues, working with our elected officials that will, one, help our particular way of life. Moving barriers out of the way that may be legislative or regulatory, that may interfere with our individual way of life. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The second is to support those things which are, as Messenger of Allah told us, to enjoin that which is good and forbid that which is evil. So if we see legislation coming up or being worked on that we think is just bad for society itself, we work with our elected officials on it. And 2 and 3 is to be kind of a bridge in regards to the needs of the Muslim community and government agencies in which we may be affected. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples. One example is that there was a council member, matter of fact, are people here familiar with Darul Salam or Hula School? I'm sure you are. There was a council member who used to give them a hard time. As many of you may know about the restrictions that were put on their facility. He wanted to go even further with a lot of the religious institutions by making it difficult for them to expand the services that they offer. We heard about this, and a number of our members who were politically involved reached out to members of Prince George's County Council, let them know that we had a problem with this issue. We also worked with the church groups who also had similar concerns, and by the time the hearing took place, it's one thing you have to understand about politics. It's one thing to say go to the hearing or something like that and voice concerns to show that you care. That's important. But usually by the time you get to that, it's already been decided. So by the time that member got to the hearing to vote on it, he was already aware that every other member of the council was opposed to it. So he withdrew it. So it never actually took place because we took the necessary steps to work with our elected officials to let them know where we were coming from, what our concerns were, so we stopped it before it could even take place. In addition, we did things like we put together forums with the elected officials. We're doing one on April 19th with District 26, which is in the Upper Marlboro area. We just did one not too long ago at PGMA with the elected officials of District 24. And what we found by working with them, the issues that were brought up at the forum, they responded to immediately. So one thing I want you to understand, even if you take a look at the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, some of them were older like the Prophet was, like Abu Bakr was, but many of them were around your age or younger. So you can have an impact immediately. One of the things that we're planning to do, not for this summer, but we're going to have it around the early winter, late fall for next, is put together an internship program, not to work for PGCMC, but to bring out various employers from the state, the government, and the private sector. So for those of you who live in this area, particularly in Prince George's County, but also in Baltimore County and Howard County, can have additional internship opportunities for the summer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you president with my cards. And if those of you who want to take a look on the website and our Facebook page and see what we do, have an opportunity to do so, particularly from Prince George's County. We'd love to get involved. You know, we have to get the next generation of people involved. When I really got involved politically, I was just about your age. So we want to see you guys get involved, and I'm telling you, you can definitely make a difference. And I hope that I have gone too far time back to telling you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
So as both of our guests just mentioned, I do have information about both programs. You can ask me about Helping Hand, and you can get contact info from me for Prince George County Muslim Council. We're going to go ahead and begin the Q&A session. Please try to keep your questions on topic and related to Islam in America. Don't ask me for McDonald's files right now. So we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, the first question we have is a really good one. How can we become an integral part of the campus community and humanize Islam while maintaining our own Islamic stance? I'm going to go ahead and let Qudsi answer that one and probably give my own few thoughts on this in a second.
جزاك الله خير. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. First and foremost, there's always going to be an aspect of questions. I want to make this clear that I'm still studying, of course, and even as you continue and you finish with your studies, you're never truly someone who has all the answers. So I don't expect to have all the answers to any questions that are here. Inshallah, please forgive me, but there is no shame in saying I don't know. But the question here is, how can we become a integral part of the campus community and humanize Islam while maintaining our own Islamic stance? Well, I think personally it starts really with how we go about maintaining our character and who we associate with. Many of us have heard the hadith about the Prophet ﷺ regarding friends. And the like of a good friend is the like of one who is, walks into a perfume shop and he walks out and he has the scent, all that good scent on him, all the smells that are really nice and smell very good. And on the other hand, a bad friend is somebody who is much like a blacksmith, where if you should walk in there and be around him for some time, you'll walk away with dust and soot and dirt on you. So how do we become an integral part of the community? It's not to become closed off. Like Shaykh Yaseen mentioned this. And unfortunately, he had to leave his family. He's sick, so please make the offer them, inshallah. But if we want to be a part of stuff, go for it. Be a part of the SGA. Be a part of campus organizations aside from MSA. Help out with MSA as much as you can. And make sure everybody knows that at the end of the day, I understand and I represent Islam because I am a Muslim. At the very core of ourselves, when someone asks us, who are you? You can say, I'm Pakistani. You can say, I'm Indian. You can say this. You can say, I'm part of SGA. But at the core, it should always be that I am Muslim. And when it comes down to it, that's how you integrate yourself. Is that you integrate yourself and you let everyone have an understanding that I am Muslim. And that's not going to change because somebody dislikes it. It's not going to change because somebody has an issue with it. It's going to be who I am, and I'm very proud of who I am. So be proud of who you are, and just continue to maintain your daily life, your relationships with other people, non-Muslims, and your activities outside of just MSA work. Want to do one more question? The question is, how can we pick jobs that can benefit Islam and allow us to provide for our families? That and question seems to be pretty popular. But as far as it goes with picking jobs that benefit Islam, you really got to you got to look at it. Yeah, as a doctor, you can benefit Islam because you might donate 10, 20, 30 grand to the masjid every year. But money only goes so far. And everybody's always campaigning for it and asking for it at fundraisers, and it seems like it's the only thing that matters, but it's really not. You see how many masjids have been built with money. They haven't been built with money. They've been built by people. They've been built by people who are dedicated to that organization. ISB has people who are dedicated volunteers no matter what. Naveed and Saad and Hassan Hamad and all these people who, all these people are dedicated volunteers who have built up this place to be what it is today. It's not something that happened just because of, just doing other things, but how do you do that and provide for your family as far as picking jobs? Well, look for something that, you can really make a difference physically. So, for example, if you want to talk about going into politics, that always seems like a rough road, but that is a career to take. You can be a politician as a career path. And how can you benefit Islam? Well, you are able to provide for your family with that job, but then also you can benefit Islam because you're helping the masjid, you're helping people, the area, the Muslims in the area, you're helping the government as a whole have a better understanding of what Islam is. And really, at any job we take, we should try and make that a prerogative, that when we go in there, we really want people to understand that I am Muslim, like I mentioned before. But sometimes, at the end of it all, we have to remember Allah is the one who provides. Allah is Al-Razzaq. He's the one who's going to be giving you your sustenance. And there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that rizq chases a person like death chases him. And what you really see is that you're not going to die until all the rizq that was meant for you is going to come to you. So, you can be a trash man and you'll get the same rizq that you were always meant to get. That doesn't mean you should just set your sights low and not do something good. Ihsan is what Islam is built on. But at the same time, understand that it's going to come from Allah. It's not from you. It's not from doing all your hard work. It's not from this and that. It is at the end of the day from Allah. Allah does not change the condition of the people until they change what's in themselves. So if you want to be a painter and you want to do Islamic art, if you want to be, whatever, you want to go into film, you want to do something, don't compromise your principles. Work in a way that you can make sure that the Muslim community as a whole is represented correctly by you. And most importantly, do your job with ihsan. If you do any job with true ihsan, and you're the best at what you do, people will always come to you. They will always come to you, and you'll never find yourself short of funds. You'll never find yourself short of the ability to provide. With Allah's mercy and His grace. How do you get your family involved with the Muslim community in order to be more active? This is very difficult, and I'll tell you personally, I struggle with it myself. My family is not particularly active in the Muslim community, and I can say that they're probably turned off more so at the idea of helping out, because they have certain stereotypes and ideas of what what's going to happen if they go and get involved or things like that. They feel like they'll be judged. They feel like they'll be ostracized. And they don't want to deal with that. So how do you get your family involved? Well, first and foremost, don't go off running and saying, you guys are all wrong, come, you should be here in the masjid doing this is haq, this is right, you guys are crazy, batil, haram, whatever. Don't go after your family like that. If you want to get your family involved, set an example and just build your character. It always comes back to character, where you really build yourself up and you build up who you are. So when people look at you, they know, hey, this guy may be, such and such, but I know he's got great character. So I don't have any doubt in when he says something. So with your family particularly, you have to set an example. If they're not active in the community, they don't want to be active, they don't feel comfortable being active, show them the benefits of it. Show them how great and rewarding it can be. For me, it's the best thing in the world to be involved in these events, to be involved in organizing, planning, all these different things. And the reason is because you have such a strong connection to the people you work with. You really build a strong bond with those people. So if you want to get your family involved, do it yourself and then set an example and help them to see it. Don't force it, but help them to see it. And inshallah, with Allah's tawfiq, they'll come towards it and be more involved. And I guess the last question, how should you respond and behave when you encounter someone who is involved with the Nation of Islam, such as da'wah events? First and foremost, I guess with all these, honestly, Allahu A'lam, right? But, you just want to make sure you stand fast to what you believe in. That's really the only thing I can say that has any weight. If you try and compromise your principles, if you try and say, well, yeah, you're right, maybe this is true, maybe that's true, that's compromising your principles. And if you compromise them in a single moment like that, where you're having debate or discussion, then they know that they got you. They know that they got you, and they can pounce on you, and they can tear apart any other argument, because you're going to be bending on these really rigid things, these really strong principles. So if you bend on those principles, then they're not going to you're not going to be able to really make a dent in what they think. If you stay strong, if you say, you know what, no, this is what it is, then that's, at the end of the day, this is the creed that we have to accept. This is the creed that we do follow as people, as Sunni and Muslim, as people part of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is how Islam is understood by us, by our scholars, by the people who have come before. So, just stand fast to your principles is really the only advice I can give in regards to that. And don't let yourself be shaken in any way. And if you feel like you don't know enough, simplest thing, educate yourself. Educate yourself. There's a problem today where we just feel like, well, there's an answer available on the phone so quickly that I can just search it up. But how dumb are you going to look if somebody's asking you a question? Like, okay, hold on a second. And then beep, boop, pop onto your iPhone, and now you got the answer. it doesn't look very good when, when you're consulting Shaykh Google when you're supposed to be just talking to somebody on the real, just straight up. Any, so, I guess that's it for me, and I'll leave it to Ahmed to finish this off. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq to get better. اللهم صل وسلم في كل مكان والآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.
So that's pretty much all we have planned for tonight. I'm going to go ahead and add some substance to the response to the question about jobs. The truth is, the Muslim community is at a stage where we can benefit from any degree of diversity in jobs. Oftentimes, growing up, the career field is painted to us as something that is something that looks like you can do medicine or you can do engineering, right? The fact is that tons of options exist, and just by pursuing these options, it doesn't have to be something strictly dedicated to social work and that kind of stuff, or even political work. Just anything that branches out. In regard to becoming an integral part of the campus community, I'm not scared to admit that our MSA hasn't been really successful in that aspect. I mean, I think we have had our successes with Islamic Awareness Week and these kind of programs reaching out to other communities, but I definitely think that there needs to be more. And I'm not going to be MSA president next year, so that's what I intend to spend my time doing, working on integration towards the campus community, because somebody else will be busy with running this stuff. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I'm really, really appreciative of our attendance, given that it's a Thursday night, there's lots of classes going on. And I also want to thank everyone for participating and volunteering with Islamic Awareness Week. You guys have shown so much support to our MSA, and I'm deeply grateful to everybody here. Most of the people left here right now are the people who have been core volunteers. So Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you for your intentions. And that's all I got.